Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the 12th part of What If Deku Had a Game Inventory Quirk. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 45. Katsuki crossed his arms as he looked over the provided jail cell. Bit cartoony, don't you think? Riot grunted as he checked over his gear. Does it really matter? This isn't Midnight's art class, we're not critiquing the design. Katsuki chuckled. Fair enough. He turned to face his team. Right. Here's how this is gonna work, each of us goes after one person on the enemy team. Go for someone who you either have an advantage against or can fight on equal footing with. Glasses stuck his hand up. I took the liberty of talking to Midoriya-kun about 1B before we arrived at Ground Gamma. Welder is able to connect things together on a molecular level, making them nearly impossible to disconnect. He carries durable materials in order to effectively trap someone with his quirk. If you remember from the sports festival, Spiral is able to rotate any part of his body at high speeds. Shemage is able to spread mushroom spores around herself, and is able to control the type of spore to produce different species of mushroom. She also carries a spray bottle to provide moisture for optimal growing conditions. Lastly, if Aftershock strikes something, he can then apply a second hit that is many times greater than the first. This can happen on his command at any time, and can hit multiple targets at the same time. Elbows rubbed at his chin. Aitsa, does your helmet have an air filter in it? Glasses shook his head. In that case, I'm probably best suited to handle Shemage. My tape can offset any mobility inhibitions caused by her mushrooms, and my helmet means that I won't be inhaling any of the spores. Riot nodded. Makes sense. I should probably take Welder, since I can probably break anything he attaches to me. Not at the connecting point, but definitely along its length. And, heck, maybe hardening will have some kind of effect on stuff attached to me. Katsuki grunted. Cool. Glasses, you take Aftershock, since you're best at dodging both his hits and anything he launches at you with his quirk. I'll take Spiral, since his spinning won't do much against explosions. We're all clear on our targets. 3 nods of understanding. Good. Riot, you hang onto Glasses so he can get you to your target quickly. Elbows, grab onto my chest with your tape so I can drag you through the air. Whoever strikes first is more likely to win this. There was a buzzing sound, and Vlad King announced, your prep time is up. Match 2, begin. Immediately, Katsuki blasted upwards, feeling Elbow's tape wrap around his torso. He angled his palms backwards and blasted off, soaring through the air over the tangle of pipes. He could spot Glasses and Riot weaving around the industrial area on foot below him. Turning his attention ahead, he narrowed his eyes and could just barely make out the 4 figures of the enemy team. Let's do this. As he approached, Katsuki grabbed the strand of tape and ripped it from his chest, flinging Elbows around and towards the girl in the white dotted dress. His tape shot out and wrapped around the girl, and Elbows flew in with a devastating drop kick that sent her flying before the other team could even react. As Elbows took off after his opponent, Katsuki dropped out of the sky, aiming an axe kick at Spiral's head. To his credit, the black-haired student managed to jump to the side, but his face went white as Katsuki's foot left a crater in the ground. Welder reached into 2 of the pockets on his costume, only to be blown off his feet as Riot rammed into him with a beautiful clothesline. Aftershock opened his mouth to shout something, only for Glasses to shoulder check him into a nearby pipe. Spiral scowled, his arms starting to spin up. Oh, no, I am not getting taken out that quickly. Vlad-sensei would hate to see 2 instant wins in a row. Katsuki grinned and slammed his fist into his palm, letting off an explosion for intimidation. Bring it, Spinny. Tenko chuckled as he watched the blonde kid from 1A square off against the spinning kid from 1B. A buzz from his pocket caught his attention, and he pulled his phone out. He really had to thank Player 2 for setting him up with artist's gloves, they made it way easier to hold things. He frowned when he saw that he'd gotten a text from Jiren. He glanced over at Eraserhead, who was looking at him. Got a chat message from my old armor shop. I'll let you know if something comes up that the rat god needs to be aware of. Eraserhead nodded, turning his attention back to the screens. Tenko walked over to an empty corner of the platform, opening the text chain between himself and the broker. Cigars, I've got someone else trying to get in contact with you. Hasn't given any kind of identity yet, but they're offering the opposite of Overhaul's deal, the freedom to use your quirk however you want. Just like last time, they're wanting all for one's resources. Tenko frowned, tapping away at the screen. Dusty, well, have you told this anonymous requester anything? Cigars, just that I'd get back to them after contacting you. Still, they seemed willing to throw as much money at me as it would take to reach you. Tenko hummed, considering his options. Dusty, tell them that they have my curiosity, but that I'm not willing to commit to anything until I get more info. Capabilities, resources, etc. Cigars, you got it? Tenko stuck his phone in his pocket and strode over to where the teachers were standing by. Nothing serious yet, but it might turn into a problem eventually. I'll update you once I have more info. Eraserhead grunted, not turning his head from the screens for a second. Keep up this double agent shtick, and I might be tempted to hire you as a sidekick once you're finished with the rehab course. Tenko snorted. Nah. I'd rather go rescue, make it up to the people I've fucked over by helping them out. Plus, I need to apologize to 13 for invading the USJ. Eraserhead chuckled. That you do. Izuku grinned as Katsuki let off one final explosion that sent Kybura stumbling backwards, right into the jail cell. As the loudspeakers declared 1A's victory, Vlad King's shoulder slumped in disappointment. Izuku heard the teacher mutter, "Why do I even try?" Izuku stood up, walked over, and patted the hero on the back. Don't feel too bad, 1B definitely has the edge in planning and thinking ahead. It's just that 1A has been forced to master how to think and plan on the spot. Different strengths. He frowned and rubbed at his chin. Now that I think about it, blending the classes together in the teams probably would have made the matches more even. Who decided to make it class on class? Aizawa-sensei grunted. I'd suggested that, but Vlad wanted to compare our teaching styles and see if one would come out over the other. I tried telling him that it wasn't a competition, but Nezu found the idea entertaining, so I gave up. Vlad King nodded quietly. I suspect I got caught up in Monoma's sense of rivalry. Nezu chuckled as he listened to the discussion at Ground Gamma between the two first-year heroics teachers. His fur stood on end, and he casually pulled a knife from one of his desk drawers, flicking it at a corner of the room hidden in shadows. There was a clang of steel on steel, and the knife fell to the floor. Akaguro Chizome stepped from the shadows, his serrated katana sliding back into its sheath. I see your reflexes have not dulled in the slightest. Nezu hummed and threaded his paws together. Our agreement was that you would not approach UA unless something came up that could threaten my students' safety. What have you discovered? Akaguro reached into his jacket and pulled out a small book with a red cover, tossing it onto the mammal's desk. Something far bigger than anything your WANA class has tackled this year. Barring the league. Nezu leaned forward and scanned the cover of the book, quietly swearing under his breath at the title, Meta Liberation War. Where, and how many? Akaguro grunted. Daika City. The entire population of 400,000. 1,500 of them are licensed heroes. Ditnerat leads them, and they are supported by Shueisha, the Hearts and Minds Party, and Feel Good Inc. Hawks is among them, though I suspect he is working as a double agent for the Commission. Be wary, they have several hidden cards up their sleeves, of which I do not know the extent. Nezu let a low growl emit from his throat. What is your strategy? Akaguro huffed. I have been thinning the herd from the shadows. From what I have heard, they plan to move in 3 months. All Might's retirement has moved up their timetable. I will remove as many of their soldiers as I can in that time. When it begins, I will support where I can. Anonymity will be my ally, so I will leave the leaders to you while I pick off the rank and file. Prepare your students, they cannot escape this. The HPSC will want every available hero to assist, and they will undoubtedly call on your students as well. Nezu nodded. I appreciate the advance warning. 3 months is very little time, but it should be enough for another round of work studies, which should provide our students with the necessary experience to survive the coming conflict. Have you given any thought to my offer? Akaguro tilted his head in thought for a couple seconds, before nodding. A threat of this magnitude requires that I am at my best. Any support you can give would be invaluable. I have heard rumors of an exceptional genius in Class 1H, and I have seen her products in action. If possible, I wish to discuss upgrades with her, but I will understand if you insist that I go to power loader. Nezu hummed and tapped at his chin. You will be permitted to work with her, but only if power loader and Eraserhead are also present. Forgive me if I'm hesitant to leave you alone with her, for both her safety and yours. Akaguro grinned. Those conditions are acceptable. Perhaps this weekend would serve for a first meeting. Okako cracked her knuckles as she waited for the signal to start the round. We're all clear on the plan. Hitachi nodded, slipping his persona cords over his mouth. We've each got our own targets, and we're clear on the optional secondary objective. Is everyone's gear functional? Aoyama grinned, light flashing from the various lenses on his costume. Fully functioning, monsieur. Hagakuru's chameleon green gloves fizzled into visibility with a double thumbs up. Ready and raring to go. Okako's gauntlets whirred, and she nodded. Everything's in order. Let's do this. Vlad King's voice rang out over ground gamma, your prep time is up? Match 3, begin. Okako tapped herself on the chest and launched into the sky, carrying Aoyama behind her. Hitachi used his capture scarf to swing from pipe to pipe, while Hagakure was nowhere to be seen. At the same time, Okako could see a mass of vines spreading outward from the other side of the training ground. Several water towers began sinking into the ground, some falling over in the process. Okako landed on a pipe and sprung off, aiming towards the center of the mass of vines. She extended her arm backwards, before flinging Aoyama through the air. A barrage of lasers tore through the vines, and Shiozaki cried out in pain. Okako grunted with satisfaction as several of the beams easily punched holes through the other girl's toga. She pressed her fingertips together and fell from the sky, grabbing a tangle of fabric in her hand and yanking Shiozaki into her swinging fist. The vine-haired girl went down like a rock, and Okako leapt into the air, just as the ground under her feet softened to a liquid consistency. Lingering vines and pipes sank into the floor, but Okako and her cargo were unaffected as she soared through the sky, back towards the jail cell. Here's hoping she reconsiders her costume after this. May hummed as she tightened the screws on her latest baby, unconsciously poking her tongue out as she focused. The second that the final screw refused to go any tighter, she dropped her screwdriver and slid her chair back, breath hitched. Nothing happened, and she gave a quick sigh of relief, before wheeling her chair forward and pressing the power button. The 4 rotors whirred to life, and the drone flew up to hover about a foot over her desk. She grabbed the controller and flicked it on, and a blue light on both devices indicated a successful connection. The screen on the controller blinked on, displaying a clear view of her own face. Good. Propellers, controller, and camera are all functioning properly. She shifted the lever at the top of the controller to the left, and the light over the camera on the drone changed from white to red. The screen shifted from a regular camera feed to an infrared display, and May grinned as she made out her heat signature above her chair. Infrared vision is good to go. She flicked the lever to the right, and it shifted to an X-ray view of the room. She grinned at the clear side of her ribcage. X-ray vision is working. She moved the lever back to the center position, and it shifted back to a regular camera feed. She pressed another button, and the entire drone shimmered, before disappearing from sight. Checking the camera feed, she grinned at the clear display of her desk. Cloaking is functional and doesn't interfere with the camera. Good. There was a cough behind her, and she jumped slightly, almost dropping the controller. She set it down on her desk and spun in her chair to look up at power loader. Sensei. Please don't startle me like that. The hero grunted, before staring at where dust was being blown across her desk. What am I not seeing? She jumped and hit the button on the controller again, and the drone fizzled into existence. My new recon drone baby, sir. She hit the power button, letting it gently settle on top of her desk before it turned off. The top split open to reveal a row of small solar panels. Power loader hummed and leaned in close, inspecting it carefully. Interesting. Did you reuse the cloaking tech from Hagakuru's costume? She nodded, a grin stretching across her face. Of course, sir. Isn't that the basis of inventing? Finding new ways to use pre-existing tech. The teacher chuckled to himself. Indeed it is. That's one of your better inventions so far this year. May frowned. Sir, you don't usually come over and compliment a student's work without a reason. Is there something you wanted to talk to me about? The teacher straightened and coughed into his fist. Yeah. There's someone who wants to talk to you about possible gear upgrades. This Saturday, at the workshop, with me and Eraserhead standing by. You'll be paid as though you were a registered support technician being commissioned for the gear. However, the guy isn't exactly on the heroic end of the spectrum, if you catch my drift. May hummed and leaned in close to whisper in the teacher's ear. You're talking about Stain, aren't you? The teacher jerked back and stared at her with wide eyes, and she waved a hand dismissively. I've caught glimpses of him moving around the school from time to time, but the principal didn't say anything, so I figured it wasn't an issue. Power Loader huffed. Fine. If you're okay with it, then ask your mother for permission to come by the school this Saturday. She gave the hero a thumbs up. No problemo, sensei. Not as if mom and I haven't worked outside the law before. Chapter 46. Kyuka snickered as Yoarashi picked up the entire enemy team, bodily chucking all four into the cell at the same time. Vlad King groaned, and Aizawa-sensei merely shrugged. I tried to get the teams to be mixed between classes. Don't blame me for this. Vlad King sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Honestly, I might just give out mercy grades for this. Team 2 is definitely getting bonus points for holding their own for a while, though. Especially Kybura. I'm honestly impressed he managed to go toe-to-toe with Bakugo for that long. He sighed again and turned towards the remaining two teams. Right. Match 5 will be starting in 5 minutes. I'm sure you 8 can find your starting positions on your own. Get moving, I want to get this over with. Kyuka immediately stood up and took off into ground gamma, aware that her team was following closely behind. She was careful not to fire off any sound waves, since she didn't want to give the opposing team any hints at her true capabilities. Always good to keep an ace up your sleeve. Her team was gathered by their assigned cell within a minute. Not wasting any time, she turned around and placed her hands on her hips. Right. Last match of the exercise, so I say we go out on a high note. Let's blow these jokers out of the water. Tsu hummed, a finger on her chin. Shouldn't we have some kind of strategy? I feel like go in and blow them to pieces would work well for Bakugo, but not us. Cowden nodded. We can't just go in, guns blazing. We need a plan. I'd offer a rat army, but they're over in ground beta, which is too far for them to hear me. Kyuka hummed. Gotcha. Tetsu is their Kiri's Hima, so we need someone with a fighting style more suited to grapples. Tsu stuck her hand up. I can handle that. Kyuka nodded. Good. Kode enlarges stuff, but my sound waves should still be powerful enough to throw it back in her face, no matter what size it is. Tsunatri's a projectile fighter, and she doesn't seem all that prepared to fight up close if her horns get destroyed. Mina grinned. Dibs. Kauda hummed. I suppose that leaves me to take care of Word. If memory serves, he makes giant onomatopoeias with properties of that sound. Here, if you finish size quickly enough, I'd appreciate it if you could assist me. I'll do what I can on my own, but I can't promise results. Kyuka nodded. You got it? I'll run a quick solo, then come over for a duet. Let's fucking do this. Izuku knew he was grinning like a total loon, but he couldn't help it. He just had that reaction whenever Kyuka did something awesome. And matching Fukidashi's boom with her counterbalance technique definitely fit the bill. Of course, the rest of her team did great. Tsu slamming Tetsu into a pipe using her tongue was a clever tactic. Mina just waded through Tsunatri's horn barrage with her acid veil. Even Kauda pitched in, hiding above Fukidashi and dropping down with a vicious karate chop when the 1B student had to rest his throat. As Kyuka's team climbed up onto the platform, the rest of the class started grinning like lunatics. It only took a few seconds before Aizawa-sensei snorted and grinned back. Good work, Hellspawn. However, in the future, try to work more as a team. Most heroes die in the field as a result of a lack of backup, so make sure you can work with another hero if the situation demands it. Vlad King sighed and shook his head as the 1B team pulled themselves up onto the stage. Well, at the very least, you all survived. I credit you for that. However, it seems we need to work on how to adapt to situations and change strategies on the fly. Plans rarely survive first contact with the enemy, if ever. Aizawa-sensei glanced over the stage, before nodding once. Right. Dismissed. Yayorozu, Aburo, your belongings have been brought to 1A's dorm building. Midoriya has been made aware of your room assignments and will show you around. Momo glanced around the first floor of Heights Alliance, humming to herself. So, UA constructed these during summer break. Okako coughed into her fist. Well, Cementos provided the basic shape, but they had to get a little help for the finer details. Luckily, Mom and Dad already had a good working relationship with the principal from when they remodeled the old dorms. Shirakumo raised an eyebrow. Old dorms? I don't remember UA having dorms when I was a student. Hitachi flopped onto a nearby couch. Well, according to Dad, that's because there weren't any international students when you were enrolled. When they got a transfer student from all the way over in the US, Nedza realized that they should have on-campus housing, and so there were a couple apartment buildings made. Of course, they weren't nearly as big as these buildings. Shirakumo hummed. Makes sense. You wouldn't want to force a high school kid to pay rent when they're from out of town. Izuku hummed and turned to Aoyama. Hey, Aoyama, aren't you from France? How come you don't bring up your family all that often? The blonde jumped, before rubbing at his upper arm with a guilty expression. It is, complete. Izuku shrugged. Fair enough. He walked towards the elevator by the kitchen, motioning for Momo and Shirakumo to follow. You've both been given rooms on the 5th floor. Shirakumo, your room is on the northern end of the west side, next to Sato's room. Momo, you're in the 2nd room from the south on the east side, right next to Okako. Just a heads up, Shimura's on the north end of the west side on the 2nd floor, between me and the exterior wall. Laundry, kitchen, and common rooms are on the ground floor, and you each have your own bathroom inside your dorm. The courtyard is open from dawn to dusk. You're required to be in the building after 9 and in your room after 10. You're responsible for your own sleep schedule, and you can't be heard more than 2 rooms away after curfew. Sleepovers are allowed so long as they're set up beforehand. The training gyms are open 24/7, though the 9 o'clock in-building curfew still applies. The kitchen is stocked with basic ingredients, but you are allowed to go and buy specific things on your own yen. We have a rotating schedule for cooking dinner, and Lunch Rush is more than willing to give lessons in his free time on the weekends. Got it? They both nodded. Good. The elevator dinged, and the doors opened onto the 5th floor. Shirakumo stepped out, tossing out a quick salute before heading down the hall. Izuku hit the 1st floor button, stepping back as the doors closed. So. Your parents were told, right? Momo winced and rubbed at her arm. Yes. Mother and father were initially quite happy to see me back at the mansion. However, the mood quickly went sour when mother said that she wished to pull me from the heroics program. She claimed that she didn't want me going to UA when the school clearly couldn't keep me safe properly. Izuku sighed. I can't imagine that went over well. The tall girl shook her head. I lost my temper. I yelled at her that my coma was no fault of UA's, but instead caused by Endeavor's abuse of Shouto. Unfortunately, mother has always been a steadfast supporter of the Flame Hero, and was incensed at my insinuation that he was less than moral. Izuku frowned. Well, you're obviously still enrolled. What happened? Momo sighed. Mother shouted that she wanted nothing to do with, in her words, a no-good, lying, demeaning bitch, and father has never been all that resistant to mother's demands. I have effectively been disowned. It was never made official, as such an event would no doubt bring negative media attention onto my family, and mother has always prioritized her image above all else. I am still officially a Yayorozu, but I have been cut off from the family fortune, business, and properties. Nedza let me stay in the teachers' dorms while my living situation was worked out. She cracked a weak smile. I suppose I can relate to Okako now. Izuku scowled. Your parents run the Yayorozu conglomerate, right? Momo hummed. Father is in charge of production, while mother handles the administrative side of things. If you're thinking about setting the principal on them, don't. While mother may be set in her views on behavior and heroics, she is still a model businesswoman. All of her dealings are legally ironclad. The best you can do is let this run its course. Izuku's fist tightened. I can't just sit back and do nothing. Momo stepped close and laid a hand on his shoulder. I did not say that you should. While you cannot do anything against her, you can most certainly do something for me. Please, just, be there. I will undoubtedly have my weaker moments. And in those times, I will need a close friend to remind me of how strong I am. Can you promise that? Izuku grabbed her hand with both of his. Of course. Anything for my vice rep. And especially for my friend. She smiled softly. Then that is all you need to do. Inko hummed to herself as she scanned over the request paperwork that would grant Musutafu Junior High permission to bring in registered Quirk counselors for Quirk training classes. To think that we would legally introduce something that Aldera was already doing illegally. Goodness, what a time this has been. Her phone rang, and Inko glanced over at it, one eyebrow raising in curiosity as she noted the caller ID. She attracted the phone to her hand and accepted the call, raising it to her ear. Good evening, Nezu-san. How might I help you? The mammal chuckled. Well, you're sounding chipper. I imagine you're quite enjoying yourself with my former student. Inko giggled. Oh, working alongside Yonda has been such fun. We've managed to procure suitable exercise equipment for hero course hopefuls, and hopefully, we'll even be able to provide Quirk training classes to the students. Which reminds me, I may be calling you at a later date to discuss the possibility of borrowing some of your teachers to lecture the third years on the basics of hero work. Nezu cackled with delight. Why, that sounds like a most wonderful idea. Giving junior high students a more accurate picture of the industry will most certainly allow for a greater influx of students with heroic potential. Still, I'm afraid that we have a serious matter to discuss, pertaining to our current first-year hero students. Inko frowned, her mind immediately flashing to Izuku. Has something come up with my son? Nezu chuckled. No, young Izuku is doing quite well. You heard that he was elected class representative at the beginning of the school year, correct? Inko hummed. I did indeed. Why do you bring that up? Well, you see, the class vice representative has run into a problem. Yayorozu Momo has recently had an altercation with her parents, and has thus been disowned all but officially. We're currently looking into possible solutions, as we can't in good faith have her remain a ward of UA for her entire schooling. We did ask her homeroom teacher, as he already has a history of adopting rejected children, but he insisted that, and I quote, having one kid in the class is already enough. And none of the other teachers were particularly prepared to adopt a child. Midnight wanted to, but her living situation wouldn't allow for it. Inko hummed. You're wondering if I'd be willing to take her in? Yes. She already trusts me through her friendship with Izuku, and being around one of her closest friends more often would help mend any mental scars caused by her disownment. Nezu chuckled again. My, you catch on fast. I can see where young Izuku gets his wits from. Inko chuckled. Don't discount Hisashi too quickly. He used to be a hero in his younger days, after all, until smoke inhalation forced him to retire early. He actually managed to find a job on Island, working as a security guard and firefighter. Oh, how intriguing. If you don't mind my asking, what was his code name? Inko hummed. Oh, yes. The draconic hero, Slifer. My, he loved pre-Quirk media, especially old anime. He and Izuku are more alike than I think either of them know. I do wish we could be in contact, but his job's location does require a level of secrecy. Nezu hummed. How intriguing. Still, back to the matter at hand, would you be willing to take in young Yayorozu? Inko smiled softly. Of course. If it'll make Izuku happy to know his friend is in a safe place, then I'm more than willing. Excellent. I'll go ahead and contact the Yayorozu matriarch about the necessary paperwork to do this quietly. While I despise her for being more concerned about her daughter's safety than her daughter's happiness, I can't deny that her company is one of the best in support. Thankfully, you won't have to do that much to adjust, seeing as young Momo is already housed in Heights Alliance for the time being. Inko giggled. Of course, Nezu-san. I will call you later about borrowing your teachers, but for now, I have paperwork for the junior high to take care of. Ah, of course. An administrator's work is never done. Ta-ta. The mammal hung up, and Inko sighed warmly as she set her phone on the coffee table. I suppose you were right all along, Hisashi. Even a Gen Ed student can be someone's hero from time to time. Izuku glanced up as the elevator by the laundry room dinged, and Momo walked into the common room, sweaty and dirty. She flopped onto the couch and sighed deeply. I have finished decorating my room. I appreciate the extra furniture, considering my situation. Okako frowned from where she was sitting on a windowsill. Yeah, Izu filled us in on the shit between you and your mom. We figured you probably wouldn't have a lot to put in your room. Momo smiled gratefully. Thank you. Mina poked her head around the corner. Hey, yeah, know what would be great, now that the class roster is finally complete? A room competition. Izuku hummed. Elaborate. Mina grinned. I would have proposed this when the dorms first got set up, but it just didn't feel right without Momo there. But now that she's here and set up, we can look at everyone's rooms, then vote on who decorated the best. Kyuka chuckled as she walked up behind the other girl. That, and you want to see everyone's taste in fashion. Or lack thereof. Mina blushed, her cheeks turning purple due to her unusual skin color. Okay, maybe that too. Izuku hummed and glanced over at where Shimura was playing on his Pikachu-themed DS. What ya think, Chimichanga? Wanna show off your gamer pad to the class? Shimura snorted. Only if you show off your own man cave. Izuku grinned. Deal. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and let out a piercing whistle, and the class was gathered in the common room in less than a minute. Right. We'll start with the boys' rooms on the west, going from north to south, floor by floor, then move to the girls' side and do the same thing. Once every room has been inspected, we'll reconvene down here and hold a vote. All clear. A chorus of assent rose up, and he grinned. Good. Let's roll. Rikiyo frowned as he glanced over the report on the tablet in his hands. We've been losing soldiers. Since when? Skeptic hummed, tapping away at his computer's keyboard. It appears the trend started about a week ago, but nobody noticed since it was at night, and in small enough numbers that nothing seemed out of place. I only noticed because I've been doing weekly headcounts. It seems that we lost 10 people each night, totaling up to 70 lost soldiers in the past week. Not a terrible loss, but the fact that someone was able to sneak in and kill 10 soldiers without being detected, let alone 7 nights in a row, is a problem, Rikiyo finished. And if they continually have success with 10 at a time, who's to say they won't grow bolder and go for a larger kill count in a night? Skeptic nodded. Precisely, sir. Unfortunately, whoever was responsible was somehow aware of the security cameras around the city, as the footage from last night provided nothing of use. And, of course, we can't place cameras inside the barracks themselves, as that would be an invasion of privacy. Rikiyo hummed. Could we not explain the situation and ask for consent to monitor them? Curious made a noise of disagreement. From the mutterings I've heard around Daika, the only reason most of our soldiers are here is because they feel safe from the heroes while they're in Daika. If we admit that someone's been killing soldiers without being seen, a good majority of them will get spooked and run off to try and find an actually safe location. And asking to monitor them would make them feel like they can't trust us to trust them. Our numbers are hanging by a thread, waiting to drop at the slightest hint of a problem. Rikiyo growled. So there's no way to catch whoever's doing this? Skeptic shook his head sadly. Unfortunately, no. Whoever it was, they were smart about it. There's no pattern among the dead that I can trace. They were all different ages, different personalities, and different meta abilities. No similarities that would point to who would be targeted next. Getten stuck his hand up, as though he was a schoolboy wanting to ask a question. Did you check their assigned living quarters? It could be that the perpetrator only attacked from a certain direction. Skeptic hummed and tapped away at his computer. No, the deaths were all in different sectors. Suddenly, he jumped. No, wait. There is a pattern. All 70 deaths happened in residences close to the city's border, meaning that the perpetrator is chipping away from the outside. Getten nodded. Exactly. Which means that he's likely not hiding within the city. Trumpet smacked a fist into his palm. So, if we strengthen our outer fortifications, we have a better chance of defending against this threat. And if the soldiers ask for an explanation, we can tell the truth and say we're strengthening our defenses against outside dangers. Rikiyo smirked. Magnificent. Soon, we will be ready to move. For the liberation of meta abilities. Chizome grunted as he stared down at the bustling city below. Cranes and construction vehicles were being shunted around, setting up additional fortifications on the edge of the city. So, they've noticed my work from the past week, and have moved to respond. They can't risk a panic among their numbers by admitting the deaths, and so they are bolstering their defenses to keep me out. Perhaps this coming week, I shall take another 10 each night from the center of the city. He laid a hand on his katana's sheath. Soon, meta liberation scum. Soon, you will be given your just punishment. Chapter 47. The class gathered outside Chimera's door, and the pale-haired man sighed as he waded through the crowd. Make it quick, Drayden's waiting for me to kick his dragon-type ass. He slid open the door, and the class went through a variety of reactions at the decor. The curtains were jet black, letting very little natural light into the room. A poster of 13 hung on the wall over the bed, and an Eraserhead poster sat over the desk. A bookcase by the bed held a variety of game controllers and handheld devices, and an EV-themed alarm clock sat on top. The desk held a small TV screen hooked up to a multitude of consoles, and a laptop sat nearby. A shelf sitting on the wall near the bathroom held several pairs of artist's gloves, each with a different pattern. Izuku glanced over at where Chimera was standing, and he noticed that the man's current pair was Mario-themed. Kaminari glanced around the room and whistled. And here I thought I was committed to gaming. The only thing that's missing is the basement smell, but otherwise, it's total neat territory. Chimera growled and curled his fingers into claws. One more word, and your Pikachu sheets are forfeit. The blonde held his hands up in surrender. Okay. I yield. Katsuki huffed as he fingered Chimera's Umbreon-patterned sheets. You're one to talk, Hanzi. Okako frowned as she glanced over at where a pair of embalmed hands rested next to the alarm clock. I would have thought you'd have left the severed hands behind with your villain persona. Chimera sighed and lightly scratched at his neck. Well, I did leave most of them behind. I destroyed all of them except for the ones that belonged to my sister, since she's the only one I didn't hate. Izuku hummed. You know, I bet we could get Mei to make some attachments that'd let you use them as actual hands. I wonder if they carry some of her quirk factor. Chimera considered that for a second. Maybe. Not now, though. Izuku proudly swung open the door to his room and grinned as the class gazed around the inside. It had taken him quite a while, but he'd settled on decorating half of the room with his gaming stuff, and the other half with his hero merch. A poster of All Might in his Silver Age costume hung over the bed, with several different hero posters lining the wall adjacent to Chimera's room. A short bookcase held his collection of hero figurines, with the top shelf being dedicated to his All Might figures. His curtains were themed after All Might's Silver Age costume, being mostly red with blue stripes at the bottom, a white stripe on top, and a yellow trim. Various game posters decorated the wall adjacent to Aoyama's room, Mario, Kirby, Overwatch, and more. A bookshelf next to his desk held several small figurines, most of which were amiibos. His laptop sat on his desk, complete with several Nintendo stickers across the lid and a Kirby-themed mousepad next to it. Mina hummed with interest. Well, I definitely expected something along these lines, but somehow, I'm still surprised. I was honestly expecting to see a lot more stuff. Katsuki snorted. The nerd actually left a majority of his shit back at his apartment. This is only a third of his full collection. Kyuka nodded. I can attest, he has way more merch piled up back at his place. His room is basically a shrine to heroes and Nintendo at the same time. You can barely see the paint on the walls underneath. Aoyama slid open the door to his room, and Izuku physically stepped back as he was hit with what felt like the combined light of 1,000 suns. As the shock wore off, he could see a multitude of glittering objects strewn about the room, including a literal shining suit of armor. The blonde giggled and struck a pose. Well? What do you think of my shine? Izuku grunted and squinted. I think I need a pair of sunglasses before I go blind. Mina nodded. Agreed. I can appreciate a good splash of glitter, but this is too much. In contrast, Fumikage's room was dark and gloomy. Every light in the room was a black light, and the curtains were a very dark gray, so there was very little natural light to be found. The raven-headed boy said nothing, simply walking over to his bed and leaning against the wall, feathers raised in a challenge. Well? Is there anything you wish to say about my choice of decoration? Kaminari chuckled. It's very you, dude. I really like that skull with the glowing eyes. Totally your style. Fumikage huffed, but Izuku could see the other boy's feathers settle down. Well, I have heard worse comments. Momo frowned and glanced over at the sword and shield leaning against the footrest of the bed. Do you practice swordplay? Perhaps it would be an effective skill for hero work. Dark Shadow popped out and leaned one arm on Fumikage's head. Technically, he only got it for the aesthetic, but I agree. Using a sword would be totally badass for hero work. Not like it'd be too hard to fit a sheath under his cloak, either, know what I mean. The second Kauta opened his door, Momo squealed with delight and rushed in to pet the rabbit sitting in a cat bed on the boys' floor. Oh, this is so precious. What is their name? Kauta chuckled and signed, that's Daisy. She wanders around the dorm, but she comes to my room a lot. Probably because of the cucumber I have growing in a planter on my balcony. Momo nodded once Izuku translated for her. A good choice. Cucumber is safe for rabbits to eat on a daily basis, and it's quite healthy for people, too. Izuku chuckled, also, if you think Daisy is cute, wait until you finally meet Tortellini. Momo tilted her head in confusion. Tortellini? Who is that? Hitachi coughed into his fist. Tortellini is our youngest kitten. Her stuff is in my room, but she roams the building a lot. We've got 3 more, but Mike has them over in 1CS building. Not a lot of Gen Ed kids are using the dorms, so there's less risk of them getting trampled over there. Plus, the kids that are in the dorms sometimes get separation anxiety over being away from home. Kaminari chuckled as he opened the door to his room. Gonna be honest, my room was a bit of a hodgepodge when we first moved in. I was still figuring out what I wanted here and what I wanted at home, you know? But hey, at least I finally got it figured out. Izuku nodded in appreciation. You sure did. As a wise man once said, it's very you, dude. Kaminari snorted as he sat down on his bed. His sheets were mainly black with yellow lightning bolts running down the sides. Several corkboards covered the walls with lightning-themed borders. Most of the boards were covered with hanging folders, complete with labels. He had 2 folders for each class, urgent work and long-term work. Additionally, there was a dartboard over the bed, a pair of yellow headphones hanging from a hook by the desk, and a TF2 poster next to said desk. Kyuka hummed and walked over, tapping her knuckles against it. Is that metal? Kaminari grinned. Yep. Got that beauty off of DISP-8. Momo raised an eyebrow. What is that? Kaminari gasped and laid a hand over his heart. My good lady, are you telling me you haven't heard of the modern way to decorate your space and express your interests? DISP-8 provides high-quality prints on real metal, along with a sticker and a magnet to put on your wall to hold the poster in place. You can support small artists or browse the website for branded posters, and switching it out is super easy. Not to mention, they've been active since the pre-Quirk era. Izuku nodded. He's right. DISP-8 is where I've gotten a majority of my posters, since official production dried up along with game development once Quirks emerged. Thankfully, their online database lets them keep their old, pre-Quirk designs on hand and available for purchase nowadays. They've even expanded into hero posters recently, though those ones cost extra because of royalties. When Itza opened his door, Izuku couldn't help but let his jaw drop at how neat and tidy everything was. Wow. I know I should have expected this, but wow. Okako nodded numbly. It's honestly a little jarring. I mean, you'd expect someone's living space to have at least a little dirt in the corners, but everything in here is completely spotless. Itza huffed. I find it difficult to focus if my surroundings are not organized. Seeing dirt and dust feels wrong, and I cannot focus on my schoolwork if I am aware of it. Kaminari nodded. Understandable. I totally get needing to have your space a certain way in order to focus properly. Ajiro slid open the door to his room with a sigh. Sorry if it's not very exciting, I just don't have a lot of stuff. Izuku hummed. That's an understatement. This looks like my room before I put up any decorations. Katsuki grunted. Same. Did you even bring anything with you? Ajiro shrugged. Well, my parents own a dojo, so I've kinda been raised to not put much stock in possessions. Though, I wish I could get a punching bag or something at the very least. Kirishima brightened. Bro, if you wanted a punching bag, you totally could have asked me. Ajiro frowned. I don't want to take up your time with my own training. Kirishima shook his head. No, not like that. I brought a couple bags along, but I only ended up having space for one at a time, so I've got a couple spares lying around. When we get to my room, you can take a look at them and borrow one you like. Xiaoji slid open his door, and the class gaped. If Ajiro's room had been basic, then Xiaoji's was just downright empty. Katsuki grunted. Never took you for a minimalist, Squidward. The taller boy formed a mouth on one of his arms. I've never liked having a lot of stuff in my area. Just felt cluttered and tight. Momo hummed. Perhaps you have mild claustrophobia? It would make sense, considering you're above average size. Xiaoji rubbed at the back of his neck. Yeah, probably. When Kirishima opened the door to his room, they were met with what could only be described as a gym bro's paradise. Inspirational posters lining the wall, a workout schedule posted over the desk, flame-patterned curtains, the works. Katsuki grunted. Well, it's expected from you, right? Though, it's a lot more organized than your school work. Kirishima chuckled. Well, exercise tends to hold my attention a lot better than homework, but I should still totally try and get better. Ajiro hummed and walked over to the stack of punching bags laying in the corner. He thumbed through the pile, before picking up a pale yellow one. Kirishima moved over and took the current bag off the hook and helped the other boy set up the new one. Ajiro gave it a few light punches and kicks, before winding up his tail and smacking it into the bag. It swayed back and forth on the hook, but didn't fly off like Izuku expected. Ajiro nodded in satisfaction. I like that one. Got a spare hook somewhere? Katsuki sighed as the class gathered outside his room. Alright, I'm only doing this because Izuku talked me into this. One funny comment, and you're out. Kapik. The class chorused their understanding, and he nodded. Good. He slid open the door, and most of the class gaped. The hero hopefuls chuckled at their classmates' reactions and casually made their way inside. Kaminari snorted at Ashido's shocked expression. What? Not what you were expecting. Well, for someone who wasn't close with him, it would be surprising. One would assume that someone with a personality as explosive as Katsuki's would have an equally explosive room. Undoubtedly, the others were expecting random bits of trash and debris strewn about everywhere. However, those who actually knew the blonde knew that, if nothing else, Katsuki was a perfectionist. He put his all into everything he did, whether it was training, schoolwork, hygiene, or room maintenance. Ironically, the one thing he was lazy with was his wardrobe. As a result, Katsuki's room was just as neat and tidy as Itsu's. A small bookshelf by the foot of his bed held his small collection of All Might and Mirako figurines. 2 posters bordered his balcony doors, an All Might poster on the left, and a Mirako poster on the right. A small frame on his desk held his silver medal from the sports festival. A water cooler sat next to the desk, along with a bag of paper cups. A punching bag hung in the corner by his bathroom, right next to a rack of towels that Izuku knew were specially made to help deal with his sweat's explosive properties. Mina opened and closed her mouth a few times, before shaking her head. Somehow, it's both what I expected and not at the same time. Though, I'm surprised by the lack of game posters. I figured you'd have at least one. Katsuki grunted. Met. I only really picked up gaming because Izuku was getting into it, and I was still half in the mindset of beat him at everything. I only really keep up with it as a hobby in my downtime. Izuku's the more serious gamer out of the two of us. Hitachi sighed and slid open the door to his room. Let's get this over with. Insomnia's been a bitch recently, and I need a nap. Izuku glanced around at the dark colors around the room. I'm guessing the dark walls help you to fall asleep. The purple-haired boy grunted. Bingo. And in case the winks don't come immediately, I've got a prescription of sleeping pills from Recovery Girl. We think it might be lingering paranoia from my time in the foster system. Mina glanced over at the Eraserhead poster over the bed. You know, I didn't think they made posters and stuff for underground heroes. Hitachi smirked. Most people don't. However, if you know where to look, you can find independent artists who are willing to make custom posters for lesser-known or underground pros. Pops knows a guy who knows of Eraserhead, so we get all our custom merch from him. Pops has an Eraserhead figurine on his nightstand. Dad nearly went catatonic the first time he saw it. Momo probably would have said something, but she was too busy cooing over Tortellini, who was sitting by the balcony doors and batting at the dark purple curtains. Shirakumo grinned as he walked up to his door. Alrighty, kiddos. Feast your eyes on this. He swung open the door with a flourish, and Izuku gaped at the sheer number of hero merch decorating the walls. Wow. And I thought I was a hero nerd. Katsuki nodded wordlessly, dumbfounded. Nearly every surface in the room paid homage to some kind of hero. An All Might poster over the desk, a Crimson Riot poster on the bathroom door, a Crust poster by the window, and many more. Mina glanced around the room and whistled. Wow. You're a real hero fanboy, huh? Shirakumo grinned. Not just the modern ones. Check it. He pointed to one of the posters near his bed, and Izuku's eyes widened. No way. You have a poster of the monkey hero, Sun Wukong. Signed. How? Shirakumo laughed. Ah, I see I'm not the only one who appreciates the classics. See, ever since I'd heard of the guy and the origins of his name, I wanted to meet him in person. Considering my quirk, I felt like it was destiny. And then, during my second year of junior high, I got caught up in a villain attack on my way home from school. I was just about ready to use my quirk in self-defense, when he dropped out of the sky and totally kicked the ass of the villain holding me hostage. Afterwards, I mustered up the courage to talk to him and ask for his autograph, and after he saw my quirk, he agreed. It was so cool. Izuku smiled. That must have been great. Being able to meet your idol in person like that. Closest I got was having All Might show up as a teacher for our first foundational heroics class. Shirakumo chuckled. Hey, that must have been cool, too. Also, I don't just follow Japanese heroes. Look. He pointed to a poster hanging by the door, and Izuku's eyes nearly burst out of his head. No way. You know about the draconic hero, Slifer? Momo perked up. Oh, I've heard of him. Supposedly, he was starting his hero career in America around the same time Endeavor was taking off in Japan. I've heard rumors that the two are actually biologically related, but I've never heard any verification. Sato chuckled as they walked up to his door. Well, it isn't really anything special, but... He slid open the door, and Izuku hummed as he took in the furniture. Huh? Did you bring in that oven yourself? Isn't that a fire hazard? Sato chuckled as the class walked inside. Well, technically, but I've got a fire extinguisher on hand in case something goes wrong. Katsuki sniffed the air. Speaking of something going wrong, it smells like something's about to burn. Sato jumped. Oh crap, my cake. He ran over to the oven and turned the heat off, sighing with relief as he opened the door. Okay, good, looks like it hasn't burned yet. He glanced over at where everyone was staring and blushed. I learned how to bake because of my quirk, and I was gonna make Momo a welcome back cake. It'll probably be better once I put some frosting on it. Actually, I think I've got a few cupcakes lying around from when I was practicing earlier. You guys want some? The girls squealed and made a mad dash for the cupboard. Izuku chuckled and shook his head. Fastest way to a girl's heart. Not that I can blame them. Yoarashi grinned as he swung open the door to his room. Behold. My tribute to the passionate heroes of Japan. It was, relatively normal, compared to some of the other rooms. Like with Shirakumo, there were several hero posters spread across the walls, but it wasn't to nearly the same degree as the blue-haired teen's room. Izuku saw a few heroes that were known for showing off in their fights, like Airjet and Slugger. However, a majority of the heroes on display were known for their high rescue rates. Kirihime grinned at the sight of a Crimson Riot poster, which sat right next to a Crust poster. Not bad, yo bro. Izuku glanced over at the rows of model planes on a bookcase sitting next to the bed. Somehow, I'm both surprised and not. Never imagined that you'd enjoy putting together model planes, but given your quirk, it kinda makes sense. Yoarashi laughed and rubbed at his neck. Yeah, well, I was actually considering trying to be a pilot if hero work didn't work out. Siro chuckled as he slid open his door. Bet you weren't expecting this, huh? Izuku nodded as he walked inside. The room was very, for lack of a better term, ethnic. Didn't think you were into this kinda thing. Siro grinned. Well, technically, I'm not, but my grandma on my mom's side loves this kinda stuff, so I get a lot of it for birthdays. Not that I dislike it, but I'm not as into it as grandma is. Katsuki snorted at the Spider-Man figure on the desk. This, though, I saw coming a mile away. Kyuka sighed as she led the way over to her door. Full disclosure, I had a similar situation to Sparky when we first got here. I'd brought almost all of my instruments, but I quickly realized that I didn't have enough space for all of them. Thankfully, I've figured out what I want here and what I want back home. She opened the door, and Izuku hummed in appreciation as he took in his girlfriend's room. Her bed was covered in red sheets with music notes on the comforter, which matched her curtains with a musical staff running along the bottom. A rack in the corner held up a few different kinds of guitars, electric, bass, etc. Her desk had a Bluetooth speaker sitting next to her closed laptop, and a large speaker was set in the corner by the guitars. The wall by the bed was coated in chalkboard paint, and the words Jack Sabbath were drawn in bold white lines. Kaminari glanced around and raised an eyebrow. I mean, it looks nice, but why all the checkered patterns? Kyuka huffed. The music center that my parents run has a checkered tile floor, and our house is on the second and third floors of the building. Checkered designs just feel homey. The electric blonde nodded. Makes sense. Hagakure swung open the door to her room, bouncing in excitement. Well, what ya think? Izuku hummed as he walked inside. It's definitely fitting. This might sound sexist, but I definitely associate you with the color pink. Pink was certainly the prevailing theme. The sheets were mostly pinkish white with magenta flower patterns. The curtains were plaid pink at the top, while the main portion was solid pink with cherry patterns. The small table in the middle of the room was pink with a heart on the top. The rug underneath was the same shade of pink. Just about every piece of furniture in the room was pink. Normally, that would be as eye-searing as Aoyama's room, but there were enough other colors sprinkled about that made it work, namely, the large number of plus-size and stuffed animals spread around the room. Katsuki raised an eyebrow. Somehow, I didn't see the plus-size coming. Though, you definitely seem like someone who'd love something that you can touch over something you look at. Hagakure giggled and rubbed at the back of her neck. Yeah. Okako opened the door to her room with a blush. I didn't have a lot of stuff when I first got here, so a lot of this is gifts from you guys over the past few weeks. Indeed, Izuku could recognize a good majority of the items. The model of the solar system atop the dresser was a gift from Mom, after hearing about the girl's love of space. The bonsai on the desk had been a present from Katsuki, who'd heard that Okako was trying to learn how to grow plants. Kyuka had gifted the other girl the 13 poster hanging by the bed. The piggy bank on the nightstand had come from Kauta. The Ryukyu figurine had been a present from Tsu after the Shihasaikai raid. Shaoji hummed and shifted one of his hands into a mouth. It definitely feels like your space. Okako smiled softly. Thanks. That makes me feel better. Mina threw open the door to her room with a wide grin. The magenta and black color scheme definitely fit the pink-skinned girl's personality and general aesthetic. However, there was one thing they weren't expecting. Izuku pointed at the chemistry set sitting over in the corner. Somehow, you don't strike me as the scientist type. Why the chemistry set? Mina blushed, her cheeks turning a deep purple. That was actually a recommendation by my Quirk counselor. There aren't any actual chemicals in the set, it's just a bunch of beakers. But they're super resistant to acid, which helps me figure out the limits of my Quirk without it splashing everywhere and burning through stuff. Katsuki let out a grunt of understanding. Makes sense. Just pour some acid in a beaker, then toss in something disposable and see what happens. Momo sighed as she walked up to her door. There is, less than I would have hoped, but what I do have is likely more comforting than what I originally planned to bring. Before she could lead the way in, Sato stuck his hand up. Quick question. What exactly is going on with Momo? Izuku sighed. Her mom wanted to pull her from the hero course, they yelled at each other, and now Momo is disowned in all but name. She needed a few donations to make her room feel more comfortable, and the hero hopefuls all pitched in. Shaoji coughed into a fist. You'd think you'd have renamed yourself something else, considering you're all in the hero course now, save for Hatsum. Katsuki grunted. We ain't heroes yet, so we're keeping the name. We'll figure out a rebranding once we graduate. Momo nodded and opened her door, stepping back to let the rest of the class file inside. It was like Aitz's room, except on a smaller scale and a little more casual. A row of short bookcases lined the wall opposite the bed, filled with various books on various topics. Her desk sat between her bed and her bathroom, with a laptop sitting on top that had been purchased by Aunt Mitsuki and delivered by Katsuki. Okako had provided the periodic table hanging on the wall. Kaminari had given Momo an office chair, which sat under the desk. Kyuka had provided the electric keyboard sitting next to the bed. Yoarashi had given Momo a copy of one of his plane models, which was hanging from the ceiling. Kirishima had provided a print of the Great Wave off Kanagawa, which hung over the bed. Kauta had provided a rabbit plushie that sat on the bed. Hitachi had given Momo a midnight poster, which hung on the wall near the desk. Izuku had provided a large pot with a jasmine shrub already beginning to grow in it, which could be seen on the balcony. Siro hummed. Well, it doesn't really feel like you, but I'm sure it's just because you're still kinda new to this whole dorm thing. Give it time, you'll make it your own eventually. The class chorused their agreement, and Momo nodded, wiping away a tear. Thank you. All of you. Tsu let out a small croak as she opened the door to her room, and the class gaped. Somehow, the froggy girl had managed to remodel her entire room to resemble a frog's natural habitat. Tiny rugs shaped like lily pads dotted the floor, and the ceiling was painted to resemble a rainforest canopy. The walls were green with thick brown stripes, detailed to look like tree trunks, branches, and leaves. Her bed sat in a corner by the bathroom, covered with blue and green sheets. Her desk was painted a sea green color, and small lily pads decorated the writing surface. Most impressive of all, however, was the small pond lined with fake rocks sitting in the corner opposite her bed. Kaminari blinked in shock a few times before he found his voice. How do you have a pool of water in your room on the 5th floor? Tsu shrugged. It made it feel more comfortable, Kuro. It's also designed so that it won't leak at all, even if I'm in it. Is it a problem? Izuku grinned. Nah. It's very fitting. He paused and held a hand up to his ear. Do you have a white noise speaker in here somewhere? Tsu nodded and walked over to the pond, pulling back a large leaf near the base to reveal a speaker set into it. Forest noises help me fall asleep, Kuro. After a while, the class reconvened in the common room on the 1st floor. Mina went around collecting the tally, before pulling out a paper crown from somewhere and moving to stand in front of the TV. The room fell silent, and the pink-skinned girl cleared her throat. All right. The winner of Class 1A's first Room King competition is, Katsuki obediently played a drum roll on the coffee table with his hands. Tsu. For the sheer genius and utter audacity to put a miniature pond in her room. The class started cheering, and the green-haired girl was quickly lifted above the crowd. The crown was placed on her head, and the group holding her up began to parade around the 1st floor. Izuku chuckled softly, before laying a hand on Momo's shoulder. Glad to have you back. She smiled back at him. It's good to be back. Still, I have a ways to go before I'm caught up with all of you in training. Izuku smirked. Let's not worry about that now. For now, let's just enjoy the moment. Chapter 48. Aizawa-sensei walked into the classroom just as the bell rang. Morning, Hellspawn. As those of you who've read the syllabus are aware, there's a second round of work studies in December. They're not required, but we are highly recommending that you all try for one this time around. Izuku frowned. Why? Aizawa-sensei grunted. We have intel that something big may be happening soon, and we want to be able to handle it as best we can. In the event that it falls to you Hellions, you need to be as prepared as you possibly can, and you've already seen the advantages that work studies can give you. This time, we're not restricting where you can go. Netsu has decided that we can trust you to find suitable mentor agencies on your own, without us interfering with the process. In addition, you're not likely to be able to strike out on your own just out of high school, so think of this as practice for applying as a sidekick. Kaminari raised his hand. Sir? What about Momo? Doesn't she need a provisional license in order to get a work study? The teacher sighed. Unfortunately, yes. Sadly, Yayorozu will not be able to try for a provisional license until next spring, so she will not be able to join you as a work study intern. However, she will be allowed to have a sort of second internship week. He glanced over at the raven-haired girl, who was listening intently. We've already reached out to the agencies that gave you internship offers after the festival, and all of them are willing to give you the same opportunity again. Though, one in particular was very adamant about seeing you again. Momo giggled. I'm fairly certain I know which agency you're referring to, sir. And I'm certain that it's the one I'll be going with, as I can't think of a better choice for accelerating my training. Aizawa-sensei nodded. Good. I'll go ahead and fill out the necessary paperwork for you. You just worry about getting back into top form. Momo glanced up at the agency in front of the group and giggled softly. Well, it hasn't changed much on the outside, at the very least. Izuku grinned. And the inside is still pretty much the same. You won't have any trouble finding your way around. Eiichiro snorted. If you can understand the layout at all. I still don't know how to get from the gym to the kitchen. It's only thanks to Mito bro that I don't get lost all the time. Izuku chuckled. In any case, let's not keep the big man waiting. He stepped forward and threw open the front doors of the Fat Gum agency. Papa's home. And he brought the kids. Vibe Check glanced up from her desk, and her eyes nearly bugged out of her head as she saw the trio walking in. She immediately hit a button and grabbed the mic by her laptop. Her voice echoed from the speakers, "Attention, Fat Gum Agency. Creatai has returned. I repeat, Creatai is back." The ground shook, and Fat Gum burst from the stairwell, immediately wrapping Momo in a bear hug. "You're back, girl. It's so great to finally have you back." The rest of the sidekicks and chefs streamed out from the various hallways, all tossing out greetings. Momo giggled and did her best to calm the crowd of well-wishers. Izuku simply chuckled and hung back by the desk. They really missed her, huh? Vibe Check snorted. You can say that again. She got along so well with everyone during internship week, it hit really hard when we heard the news. Everybody's been on edge since summer break. Eiichiro grunted. Tell me about it. The place didn't feel all that warm when I showed up for work studies. The sidekick blinked. Oh yeah, about those. Izuku and Eiichiro handed her their empty skewers in unison. She chuckled and stuck them into a cup on her desk. Yeah, I figured. Glad to have you back on the team. Rikiyo frowned at the report in his hands. The new fortifications haven't stopped the deaths. Skeptic grunted. Unfortunately, no. If anything, this attacker has only gotten bolder. They killed 30 soldiers just last night. The casualties are only getting higher and higher, and we haven't even made an official move yet. Rikiyo scowled. Have we lost any of our hero moles? Skeptic shook his head. No, sir. If they were a larger percentage of the standing army, I could definitively say that they're being avoided, but as it stands, there's no way of knowing if it's intentional or coincidence. Rikiyo's scowl deepened, his meta ability painting his forehead dark purple. Then we must speed up our preparations, to ensure that we are ready to strike before we lose too many of our men. Getten, how goes the training of our newer recruits? The man in the blue parka grunted. Not well. Most of them are nearly incapable of following orders, and they seem to believe that they can't improve their meta abilities at all. Suddenly, Trumpet burst into the room. Sir. Pardon the intrusion, but I have important news. Rikiyo raised an eyebrow. Speak. One of our newest soldiers is convincing his fellows to train their meta abilities. Getten frowned. Who? Trumpet rifled through his jacket, pulling out a tablet displaying an image of a teenage boy, old enough to be a high school first year. This boy is Yobi no Baju. He was a student at Aldera Junior High, until it was shut down. One of our scouts found him sulking near UA, and he was quite eager to join when he heard of our goals. He has been making himself heard in the barracks, explaining that the heroes are sure to have strong meta abilities and that they should train themselves in order to be able to stand on the same level. He backs his claims by citing Ground Zero, one of UA's first-year hero students. Apparently, he was once classmates with Ground Zero, and has seen his meta abilities' strength firsthand. Yobi is adamant that if the enemy is of even a fraction of that strength, then our soldiers wouldn't stand a chance without training. Rikiyo frowned. And what is his meta ability? Trumpet tapped at the screen. He is able to extend his fingers to many times their original length. Supposedly, he could only manage a lowly half meter in junior high, but has since trained it up to 3 meters. Rikiyo hummed. Not incredibly useful in combat, but his training and information are setting an example for the other soldiers to follow. Getten, you said you were having trouble getting the new recruits to obey? Yes. Perhaps you could enlist this Yobi boy as your assistant. He seems to have a gift for getting others to listen to him. Getten nodded. At your command, sir. If his assistance will move up our timetable, then we will use it. The warmly dressed man left the office, and Rikiyo smirked. Well, that handles our troubles in that area. Curious, How goes progress with contacting Shigaraki? The blue-skinned woman frowned. Not well. We contacted Jiren, who we know helped direct recruits to the league, and he said he'd contact Shigaraki. Our most recent communication was that Shigaraki would consider the offer, but only if we gave more information. Supposedly, he wants to know if we're worth his time before he gives us anything. Rukia scowled. Well, the two definitely have a connection. Perhaps if we abduct the broker, we can draw Shigaraki out of hiding when he attempts to save Jiren. Curious nodded. I'll have one of my assistants contact Jiren and say that our information is too valuable to give out over text, and that we'll hand it over in person. Then we can trap him in a location of our choosing. Skeptic grunted. Don't get careless. Jiren is as slippery as they come, perhaps even more so. He's like a squid, if there's even the smallest gap in the net, he'll squeeze through and escape. Tenko was in the middle of kicking Yveltal's feathery ass when his phone rang. He groaned, closed his 3DS, and checked the caller ID, raising an eyebrow as he did so. The fuck is Jiren calling me for? He accepted the call and stuck the phone by his ear, preparing to go back to his game. Lay it down for me, and make it fucking quick. A voice that was distinctly not Jiren answered, finally. You're a very difficult man to talk to, Shigaraki Tamura. Tenko froze, before slowly wheeling his chair away from his desk. Who are you, and what the fuck have you done with Jiren? The voice chuckled. Do not worry, the broker is still alive. However, I cannot say that he will continue to be so if you do not cooperate. Tenko huffed. Fine. Make your demands. Silently, he hit the button on the underside of his desk, sending a signal to Eraserhead that would let the hero know that something was up. For starters, we are in need of massive amounts of resources, something that we know for a fact All For One has been stockpiling before his death. Soldiers with strong abilities, ones that obey orders. Tenko frowned as Eraserhead silently walked into the room. Why do you want the Nomua? Simple, Shigaraki Tamura. We need to increase the numbers of our army. As for why we need an army, well, that information is classified to non-members. If you join our cause, you will be told more about our goals. Internally, Tenko snorted. I remember giving almost the same line when talking to Stain about joining the league. Outwardly, he hummed in disappointment. I could have sworn Jiren passed along a message that I wouldn't consider your offer unless you gave me something substantial to work with. At the moment, I'm not hearing anything that'll remotely convince me to help you. And with you having kidnapped my contact, you're not exactly in my good graces. The voice on the other end huffed. Very well. Come to the north entrance of Daika City in 2 days' time. We will discuss negotiations. Tenko grunted. North side of Daika City in 2 days. Got it? He hung up, and Eraserhead huffed. Did they say who they were? Tenko shook his head. All we know is that they captured Jiren. Beyond that, nada. I don't trust him. The hero sighed. Joy. Well, we'd better get you prepped for that meeting in 2 days. Wouldn't want them getting annoyed if you don't show up like you promised. Izuku popped his knuckles as Momo stepped out of the changing rooms, clad in her brand new hero costume. So, how is it? The raven-haired girl smiled softly. Incredible. I really must commend Hatsum-Chen for crafting this on such short notice. The outfit was a far cry from her original costume. The base was a full-body jumpsuit, similar to Okako's first uniform, but with substantially more padding for comfort. It kept the red base color, but now featured black circles of varying sizes on her upper arms, hips, and thighs, along with a larger one between her shoulder blades. These circles were made from DNA-infused fabric, which would allow her creations to pass through it. It was a unique problem for Momo, as her creations had to pass through her skin, whereas Izuku's equipment could simply appear directly in his grip. In the event the fabric failed, there were silver rings inside the black circles that designated Velcro straps, which would allow the fabric to detach and expose her skin in a pinch, and also easily reattach afterwards. She sported black gauntlets that extended down to just before her elbows and had brass knuckles. She also wore black combat boots with reinforced solace and a set of black pauldrons that could be easily removed in a pinch. Her right gauntlet served as a replacement for her encyclopedia, containing an electronic display on her forearm that could hold up to 500 gigabytes of files. Her bookshelf had been removed and replaced with a utility belt for carrying food and medical supplies. Her left gauntlet had a large compartment on the outside holding multiple sheets of metal, which could unfold and become a small, round buckler on her arm. Supposedly, the alloy was similar in makeup to Izuku's vest, but sacrificed flexibility for durability and defense. The palms of her gauntlets were bare to allow her creations to pass through, but a press of a button could extend sheets of the same metal over the gap to protect her hands if needed. She also carried a holster at the base of her spine for her signature collapsing bow staff. According to May's note in the costume case, it now featured a taser in one end, magnets in the center to let it split into eskrima sticks, and a 10-meter grappling hook in the other end. It was also keyed to Momo's fingerprints and DNA signature, so if anyone else tried to wield it, they would be given a quick shock as strong as that of a police taser, just painful enough to make them let go, but not strong enough to kill them. Momo adjusted her belt, making sure it was snug around her waist, before checking the clasps on her staff's holster. It's truly incredible just how comfortable this feels, especially compared to my original outfit. Father definitely has some new competition in the support industry. Izuku grinned. Most of the class has already declared her their personal support technician. She handles gear upgrades and maintenance for everyone except Aoyama, Aitsa, Ajiro, and Shaoji, and that's just because they haven't met her yet. Though, I think Ajiro might be persuaded to talk to her. He seems like he's not happy with his costume. Momo giggled. Oh, you noticed, too. I imagine Hatsum-chan would attempt to put a spiked ball on the end of his tail, or something equally ridiculous. Izuku hummed curiously. Huh. You know, that might not be a bad idea. He suddenly shook his head to clear his thoughts. Anyway, back on topic. He led the way to the stairs, heading towards the front doors of the agency. Normally, for internships, you'd only go on patrol with the leading hero at the agency, but given the circumstances, I'll be patrolling with you instead. Ajiro is currently showing Tetsu the ropes, and Fat Gum is swamped with paperwork. Momo nodded, easily adopting a serious expression and stride. Of course. Though, as I remember, our internship consisted mainly of testing with the analysts and physical training in the gym. I don't think we ever went on an actual patrol. Izuku nodded. Right. So, here's a full lesson on patrolling. He swung open the double doors and immediately started down the sidewalk, Momo falling into step next to him. The main reason that daylight heroes patrol during the day is to discourage would-be criminals and make the citizens feel safe. If a hero's nearby, someone's less likely to commit a crime out of fear of being caught. Momo nodded. That makes sense. And if there happens to be a particularly brave, cocky, or stupid criminal, then a hero will be nearby to catch them in the act. Izuku grinned. Precisely. Now, around here, the main thing you have to worry about is fights between different gangs. When we get back to the agency, I'll draw up a map of the different territories in the city, along with a list of important names to familiarize yourself with. If you ever wake up somewhere unfamiliar, knowing when to drop which names is your best shot at getting out intact. Momo frowned. Aren't gangs illegal? Shouldn't we try to dismantle them? Izuku shook his head. Technically, the gangs around here are closer to miniature Yakuza families, which aren't illegal in and of themselves. They're very tight-knit, and they usually stick up for the poor communities in their territory. The larger gangs are usually the less troublesome ones, as they don't stir up trouble and draw police attention, meaning they have more opportunities for recruitment. Momo hummed. I see. Izuku nodded and continued, for a hero, the best place to wind up in is the area run by the Moonlight Corps. They're really only a gang in the sense that they're a group of people that act against the law. If anything, they're a large vigilante network. They help out heroes and police when they can, but they don't stick around long once the professionals get to the scene. If you can prove that you won't try to arrest them, you can gain partial access to their information network, which spans nearly every major city in Japan. The Asuha branch is one of the smaller ones, but they've still got enough resources for an emergency patch-up if a hero gets roughed up trying to take down a back-alley villain. Just below them on the moral ladder is the Spiders gang. They're one of the more respectable players in the criminal underworld, given that they don't really have grudges against heroes. They'll defend themselves if a hero catches them doing something illegal, but they're otherwise neutral. Momo hummed thoughtfully. I see. Izuku nodded. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have the Starlight Warriors gang. Those guys are the nastiest pieces of work you'll ever run into in Isuha. Every member has a major grudge against heroes, and will usually attack on sight if they see someone wearing a costume. Some of them even go so far as to attack people wearing hero merch. Last I heard, they'd taken Stain's ideology and run with it in the complete wrong direction. Thankfully, they're easy to identify. Every member wears a black headband with 6 red stars in an inverted triangle pattern. Something about down with heroes. Momo winced. I will do my best to avoid them, then. Izuku grunted. Good plan. Also, the Moonlight Corps and the Spiders have their own identifiers. Moonlighters have their own distinct vigilante costumes, but they do have one common element, a patch over the heart in the shape of a waxing crescent moon. Waxing crescent specifically. If you see a waning crescent, be careful, that's the symbol of the Dark Hunters, a group of thieves. The only reason those guys are still around is because they all have stealth-based quirks that make them hard to track down. The Spiders all wear a red hourglass shape on their chests, similar to the marking of a black widow. Remember, a red hourglass. If it's a red bowtie, then those are the Kingsmen. Not nearly as bad as the Dark Hunters, but still a group to be wary of. Though, the Kingsmen do value proper behavior, so you'd likely have an easier time with them than I would. You got all that? Momo nodded. A waxing crescent for the Moonlight Corps, a red hourglass for the Spiders, an inverted triangle of 6 red stars for the Starlight Warriors, a waning crescent for the Dark Hunters, and a red bowtie for the Kingsmen. Izuku nodded. If you ever wake up in a Moonlight Corps hospital, you want to ask for Skyliop. Officially, she's a sidekick for Fat Gum's agency, but she's actually the old vigilante pop step. She's got a soft spot for heroes, especially after the Crawler got hired as Skycrawler at Captain Celebrity's agency in America. Well, he was with Captain Celebrity, but when Ingenium retired, he came back to Japan and joined Team Itaten. Apparently, Crawler has a soft spot for Tensei. Momo giggled. That's sweet. So, ask for Skyliop if I'm with the Moonlight Corps. Izuku nodded again. Right. If you wind up in Spider territory, ask to speak with Arachne. She's the head of the group, and she and Fat Gum have an unspoken agreement. She keeps the other gangs in line as much as she can, and in exchange, he won't go after her group. Momo nodded. Understood. Izuku grunted. If you find yourself in Starlight or Dark Hunter territory, don't bother trying to negotiate. Get out as quickly and painlessly as you possibly can. With the Kingsmen, I think if you conduct yourself properly enough, you can barter with the head for your release. Last I checked, they're led by a guy who goes by Sir Gawain. Momo nodded again. Right. Hopefully, I'll remember the protocols Mother drilled into my head for formal occasions. Perhaps they will finally be useful, for once in my life. Izuku snorted. Yeah. Rukia glanced up from his desk as the door to his office opened, 2 of his captains hauling in a half-dead body. Grand Commander. We found this boy lurking around the perimeter of the city. The boy glanced up, and Rukia inhaled sharply at the face of Endeavor's youngest child. Well. I certainly wasn't expecting to meet you in person, Todoroki shouted. The 2 captains glanced at each other, before releasing the boy and quickly retreating from the room, shutting the door behind them. Todoroki stood, shaking heavily and leaning on his right leg. Please, help me. I don't know what to do with myself anymore. Rukia huffed. And what possible use would I have for you? A half-dead child is not good for much. Todoroki huffed. Of course, you would say that. Nobody cares about me. They only care about what I can do for them. Not that I can do much anymore. Rukia raised an eyebrow. And why do you say that? Even with your injuries, I'm certain a power as strong as yours would have some use. Todoroki chuckled drily. You don't watch the news much, do you? I was robbed of my quirk. All for one took it from me. Rukia scowled. Then you are of no use to me, or anyone. He hit the button on his desk to call for the 2 captains outside. Men, escort this null from the premises. I want it out of my sight. And call for someone to disinfect the carpet. All right, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.